In this video, we'll go over using the services form as a standalone feature within the program. TPS was designed with the workflow of your office in mind to increase efficiency throughout your day. This is accomplished using the loop through the appointment book by getting patients checked in, which launches the loop. Now, you may not have purchased the appointment book or you use something else for your appointments, so the loop would not be of too much use to you. This is okay because you can access the services screen outside of the appointment book. To do so, simply click on the icon with the shopping cart with the letter CPT above it. This will open your services screen. Now the first thing you'll notice is that this window is fairly small. I myself like to work with a maximized window so that it fills the whole screen and I can see as much information as possible. Now if I close out of this window and then open it up again, you'll notice that the screen remains maximized. TPS has saved this setting to your liking. If I were to minimize it again like so, close out of it, and then open it again, it would be small again. I can adjust it by clicking the edges and dragging. So maybe I like this kind of setting. Pretty much, do what works for you, close out to save it, and it'll be like that every time until you change it again. We're going to work with a maximize screen setting. And another note is that these columns here can be adjusted to suit your purposes as well. Here we have business all the way on the right. Now, you may want the business much closer to the provider so you know which provider is working for what business. Clicking and dragging the column and then closing out will save the setting. Here we can see that the business remained over here next to the provider. Scrolling to the right, there are a great many fields here in the services screen, and obviously we can't fit them all on the screen at the same time. So it's best to drag the ones you use the most often all the way to the left so that you can see them on startup. Over here on the left, we have a list of all the services and inventory items we've entered into the program. These can be selected to add to your patient claims. Currently, the category is set to all categories, which will display every last service and inventory item. This sort order is determined by the inventory and services sort order you set up when going through the setup wizard. It's very important that you put services you use most often at the top, as well as the categories you use most often at the top, so that they're the most easy to access. This will save you a lot of time in the long run when you're clicking services into the patient's claim day in and day out. Clicking on this category drop-down, we can select a specific category to filter our services. I've selected exams, and it will show all services that have been entered under that category. You'll notice my list is much smaller and much easier to navigate. Below the category, we have the UPC field. If you've purchased the inventory module from us, you can enter a UPC code and attach it to an inventory item in your master list. From here, you can either type in the code, or if you have a barcode scanner attached to your machine, you can scan the inventory item and it will enter it here on your patient's claim, an incredibly convenient feature. I'm going to go ahead and add a few items. A CMT 1 to 2, and a belt. Let's say a lumbar support belt. Okay. Here you can see that they're in the order I entered them in. We have the visit dates, we have the provider, the business they're attached to, quantity, here's the CPT code and description, source location, and source type, the diagnoses pointers, here's the total amount charged for the service, and the breakdown between carrier and patient. This particular patient has a carrier who will foot the entire bill for the service and inventory item, so there is nothing in the patient section. If I needed to make a one-time adjustment, such as move this 185 to the patient side, I would click in the patient's field and then type in the amount. Here you can see it was moved from the adjustment column to the patient's column. When added together, these two equal $35. I could not enter more money into the patient or carrier column because it would exceed the total amount of the service. To put the money back in the adjust off column, simply highlight the amount here, remove it, and when you click away, the program will automatically do the adjusting for you. Any discounts are calculated right here, as well as any tax for the carrier or the patient. If there was any amount paid, it would appear in this field. If there's a facility attached to the provider delivering the service, that appears here. Down here at the bottom, we have the financials for this patient and carrier. Here we have the previous balances before the services were entered. Now the patient isn't being charged anything, but at some point they were, and they still owe $35 to your practice. The carrier likewise owed $105.77 before these services were added. Here we would see today's charges, $61.15 for the carrier, along with $230 in taxes. And then at the bottom, the total balance that the patient and carrier now owe after the services have been entered. Right here we have the on-account balance if the patient has any for their claim. This is money that would have been put on account for the patient or carrier to use at a later date, such as an overpayment or a prepayment or something like that. Here we have in bold what the patient needs to pay off their entire balance. Here we see that the patient pays $35 and the balance is $35, so it matches up. If you'd like to add a discount, you can do so with this button over here, below the services list. Below that, we have the visit date, which automatically populates with today's date. If you're doing a little bit of catch-up though and you need to backdate a service, you can simply change this date by clicking the calendar, selecting a previous date, and then adding the service in. Below this we have the year-to-date, in-series, and total visits. These are visit counters that allow you to know how many times the patient has been in various parameters. This checkbox here that says new services are not a visit will not count services as a visit as long as it is checked off when you're entering in your services. Down here at the very bottom where it says message from provider, we have a section in Documenter where the provider can put a message within Documenter for this patient's claim that will appear here when you open the services screen in TPS, one of the many ways the two programs communicate. Going to the top of the page, we have the day limit if there is one for the patient, a deductible, how much of that deductible has been used, and the copay. Currently this patient has no figures for these features, and so they're all blank. Here we have the primary carrier. If they had a secondary or tertiary, this little box here would be filled out with those carriers. And then right here we have the diagnoses codes, 1 through 4, and then 5 through 8, along with their descriptions. Over here on the right, we have the Show Closed Services checkbox. Whenever you close services in TPS, you no longer see them here in this particular screen to save loading time. If you would like to view those services, simply click this checkbox, hit yes to the pop-up message that appears, and the services that you've rendered in the past but have closed on will appear here in gray. Note that these cannot be deleted like normal services that have been entered for today. They must be adjusted off and re-entered again. Once you've checked this box, it is checked off for all patients in the system. You do not have to check this off for individual patients as you see them. Go ahead and uncheck it again to turn it off. And here we are, just today's services. When ready to enter a payment, go to the top left where you see the tab that says Enter New Payments. Clicking it will change the screen, allowing you to see outstanding services and allowing you to pay for them. Note that only patient payments can be made from this screen, and that carrier payments are made in our Payments, Refunds, and Transfer screen, which we'll go over in a later video. Here is a list of all the outstanding services, however, whether the carrier owes money or the patient owes money. Here we see the total, the remaining balance, and the patient's portion. Here in this white column, we can enter any amount of payment received. In the top left here, we can enter the payment amount by highlighting and typing it in. Ivan here is going to pay the full $35 so he can balance out his account. And he has cash in hand today, so we'll select cash. You'll notice that there's check, credit card, and off account, in case he had any money on account with your office. Extra payment methods can be added through the registry or during the setup wizard when you're getting started with the program. Here we can enter a check number if the patient is using a check, and the date of the payment. For instance, if you're doing a little catch up and you need to backdate a payment as well, you can do so to match the check date. Below that, we have two buttons, Apply to this visit first or Apply to oldest visit first. Basically, you can choose whether you want to cover older balances first or newer balances. Currently, this patient only has one service to pay for, and so choosing either one of these does not make a difference. However, if they had some older services from 2011, for example, that they still owed money on, and I clicked Apply to oldest first, it would do so. Now that I have my payment entered, I can hit Apply Payment Amount, and you can see here that the amount is automatically applied to the service. I could have just as easily entered it in myself as well, like so. If the patient had more charges, but he wanted to pay with a credit card and cash, I could click Add Another Payment, and a new payment would be created, allowing me to re-enter additional information. Notice that the button below Add Another Payment is grayed out, and it says Submit to XCharge. XCharge is a third-party company that's partnered with Eon Systems and they deal specifically with the business of processing credit card information in your office. If you have an account with them, you can swipe a credit card through a machine, and the money will transfer directly from the patient's account to yours. This can then be synced up with TPS to print out credit card receipts to make entering credit card payments a little faster. If I were to select credit card instead of cash, you would see that the button would no longer be grayed out, and I could click Submit to XCharge. Below here we have the ability to allow a partial credit card payment, and then the ability to mark this payment as an electronic fund transfer. EFTs imply that the money never actually exchanged hands, but rather went from one account to another account, all via electronics. For the most part, this will be just credit cards, but some payments can be electronic checks from carriers as well and can be marked as such. Finally, at the bottom here, we have the Use Fast Pay method. Now let's say Ivan here was a cash patient instead of an insurance patient. If this were to be checked on, the next time I enter services and come to the payment screen, this amount would automatically fill with what the patient has to pay, and it would use the previous payment type that the patient used in their last visit. In this instance, $35 would fill out because it says patient pays $35. Type of credit card would automatically populate, and the payment would automatically apply itself without me having to click anything. If you run a practice where the majority of your patients are going to pay their balance up front at the end of the visit in the same method every single time, the Use FastPay method is incredibly convenient and makes this entire process last only a few seconds. All you have to do is to make sure everything's correct, and then you can click Save Done or print the receipt. Speaking of receipts, to print them, simply click this Print Receipt button with the icon of a printer on it. It will ask if you would like to continue by saving the payment information, and we can click Yes. Here we have a variety of receipts that you can choose from. Find which receipt is best for you in which situation so that you know which one to use when handing out statements and receipts to your patient. Taking a look at the basic patient receipt, we can hit Preview and take a look. We have today's services which were rendered, of charges of $35 and zero payment because the patient doesn't owe any money on this. Scrolling down, we can see some other financial figures, such as the patient balance, the insurance balance as it currently is, and then the totals. This is the total of the charges for today, and the total payment made, $35 on the previous patient balance. Go ahead and close out of the preview, and we can close this screen. Now we're done entering payments for Ivan. We can close the screen by hitting Save Done or the X in the top right corner here, or we can go back to the services screen to select a new claim for a new patient to work with. For instance, I could hit this button and my entire claim list will pop up, and I could search for the patient I want to use and select them. We can add in some services, such as the CMT 1 to 2, and then continue on with the process as we were before. One final note in this screen is the ability to change the provider rendering the services. Here we have the default provider for this patient. If I click the drop-down, I have a list of all my providers, followed by the business they're associated with, followed by the facility they're associated with. If I were to select Dr. Johnson here, he also works for Allswell Chiropractic, so the information remains here. If I were to select a different doctor who works for a different business, such as Dr. Mark here, who works for Diagnostic Medicine, you'll notice that the service is no longer on the screen. This has not been deleted and is still within this patient's claim. However, you'll notice that the business has changed as well. In TPS, services and payments are designated by the provider to certain businesses. So if one provider works for Business 1 and performs services and receives payment, they go to Business 1. Likewise, if another provider works for Business 2, all services and payments will go to that business and are displayed as such in the services screen. Here I'll apply a 3 to 4 areas, switch my providers back to Jonathan Greenwood, and you'll notice that now we have the previous services entered just a moment ago. If I had entered in Jonathan Greenwood in error, I can go to the provider column here, click the drop-down, and select from a list of providers who are associated with the selected business. Notice I only have 2 instead of the many I had before because these are the only 2 providers who work for Allswell Chiropractic. Simply select Donald Johnson if necessary, or Jonathan Greenwood if that was correct. This wraps up the tutorial on walking through using the services screen as a standalone feature. Let's go ahead and move on to the next video.